So my name is David. I live and work in London as a data journalist and information designer. And that just basically means that I have a passion for data and information. All kinds of data and information, numbers, ideas, words, statistics, and visualizing that data and information in graphical images that anyone can understand. And I like to go a step further and design that visualized information so that it reveals something interesting, or allows us to focus on what's important in the sea of data that surrounds us, or maybe drowns us. Or design that visualized information so it tells a story. That's the data journalism part. And I think when you do that, when you gather big data, you analyze it, you visualize it, you design it, you tell a story with it, strange, interesting, even quite magical things can start to happen to data and information. So I'm going to tell you a load of data-driven stories about the world, about citizenship, about populations, and you can see for yourself whether it works or not. So I'm going to start with a data set that I think we can all relate to, or maybe we struggle to relate to, and that's billions. You know, what does $100 billion look like? $1,000 billion. These numbers are routinely circulated in the media, in company reports, in government spending. They're meaningful for governments, these amounts, but they're meaningless for citizens. They're impossible to understand. They're too large to comprehend. So frustrated by this, I gather a load of these numbers together, and I visualize them in one place. In this diagram I call the billion-dollar-ogram. So the blocks here are sized according to the amounts, and the colors here represent the motivation behind the money. So green is revenue, pink is giving money away, and so on. So when you take big abstract data points like billions and you visualize them like this, you instantly have a different kind of relationship to them. You can literally see them. But more interestingly, you can start to see patterns and connections and links between numbers that would otherwise be separated, scattered across multiple sources, numbers you'd never see together. Let me highlight some for you. Here, the block in the left-hand corner there, that's the amount given to charity by the American people every year, $300 billion. Very generous people. And you can contrast that with the block next to it. That's the amount given in foreign aid by the top industrialized nations of the world, just $120 billion. This huge block here, this is OPEC's revenue, approximately, about $800 billion. And that little square in the corner is their climate change fund. And then we have the total eventual cost of the war on terror, the Iraq and Afghanistan war, 3,000 billion, so 3 trillion. And that's the little square in the corner. That was the predicted cost back in 2003 when the war was launched. So often with data, the story isn't in the data points themselves, in those numbers. It's in those gaps, in those contrasts, in those comparisons, in those relationships. The context, if you like. And this data is a little bit like Lego, you know, the building blocks here, and I can keep adding data as numbers emerge so it can act as a living context, almost like a platform. So I can add the total cost of the financial crisis, the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, still reverberating around the world. So imagine how much of the diagram might be taken up by that amount. Let me add it now. There it is, 12,000 billion, 12 trillion, but even that number we hear now is dwarfed by the amount sequestered in offshore tax havens by the world's richest elites. That number is estimated to be around 22,000 billion, 22 trillion. So these numbers are important. They're important to understand the world. They're important to understand governments. They're important to understand spending in general. So being able to see them just allows us to be able to start to relate to them, open up, and get to know them. Now, government spending is a particular area where billions comes into play, as I'm sure you all know. And I did a similar diagram. This is for UK government spending. So this is the billion-poundogram. This is how much our government in the UK spends on various silos. You can see health. We have a nationalized health service. It costs about $140 billion. Pounds. That's about $200 billion. Education is approximately half that. So here you get the layout of our spending. You can start to relate to what the government's spending. But still, a little bit, we're in the realm of billions. We're still in these celestial numbers. I can't relate to these numbers in any everyday sense as a citizen. So I wondered, is there a way I could present these in a more easy to relate to way? So I came up with another metric. Same numbers, but converted into this metric. The amount contributed per taxpayer per day to each of these silos. And my thinking here is like, I don't exactly know how much I spend a year or a month, but I know how much I spend a day. That's a number I can relate to. So that That health budget translates to about £2.40 a day. That's about $3 a day. Education is about £2 a day. The EU, you've obviously heard about Brexit. That just cost us 20 pence a day, the membership. We've chosen to leave that system. And Scotland, just £1 a day, a bargain, worth every penny. So when I create an image like this, I really feel like a true journalist in the sense of being a member of the media, in the sense of mediating between the vast seas of data on one side and everyday life on the other. And if you can create a bridge, a visualization to bridge those two, you can increase engagement. Your populace can start to see where the money's going. They can start relating in an everyday sense, and that will increase engagement. Now, there's not a lot of visualization going on in this image. I've used some visual little icons to draw the eye. The final version of this image ends up looking like this. So it's more of a flow. You can see the flow of expenditure. You can see how it all accumulates and how it all relates, and you can explore it. It's like an information map. You can find the numbers that are relevant for you and start taking them in. So one of the powers of visualization, to bring data down to earth and start being able to relate to it. Now, before I became a data journalist, I was a print journalist. I worked for The Guardian and some other newspapers. And as you all know, one of the biggest themes in the media, one of the best stories you can ever do to get on the front page, if you'd like, is to write a story about fear, to whip up fear and anxiety. And it seems that there's always something we're supposed to be scared about. So it struck me, I wonder what a timeline of the world's major media-inflamed fears might look like. So I came up with this image. I call this mountains out of molehills. And I'm going to label this for you. But these are, along the bottom we have time. And the height here is the intensity, so the number of times each of these fears have been mentioned in the press. So that very pink spike in the center, that's swine flu. The one next to it, the yellow one, is bird flu. The one alongside that, orange, is SARS. Do you remember SARS? Yep. The little gray spike on the left, that's the millennium bug, the fear that our computers would topple at the turn of the millennium. The green foreground humps, the light green, are asteroid collisions. And in the very foreground, those little blue humps, killer wasps. Every summer, you'll see a story in the papers about killer wasps. So these are our fears as they rise and fall in the media, as they rise and fall in the group mind, if you like. And immediately, you can see a kind of pattern. Every 2 or 3 years, there's a spike, usually around a disease. A disease is a great media-inflamed fear story. It's invisible, it kind of creeps, it infects, you can't really see it. It's a great story. And if you remember, about 4 or 5 years ago, about this time, we were wrestling around with the fear of Ebola. Do you remember when the newspapers were gripped with Ebola? So let me add the Ebola spike now. Here's the spike for Ebola. So you can see it goes off the diagram. And in fact, if I scale this diagram to accommodate the spike, it actually looks like this. So that's the exponential increase in our media-inflamed fears. Now, it's important to be able to see this because we intuit that there's some pattern to these spikes. We intuit that the media relates to our anxiety in some way. And people that are anxious don't make rational decisions and are easily manipulated. To be able to see it reduces the anxiety. You can see the pattern. There's a sort of leveling out, and more rationality comes in. That's the possibility. I'm going to show you another landscape of data now. I'm going to get you to guess what this data set might be. We're swamped in data all the time, but sometimes you can find gold in the data. There's a trend. There's something that peaks twice a year. Once around about Easter, and then about 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas time in the West. Has mini peaks every Monday, but then flattens out in the summer. Any guesses? Sorry? Holidays? Yes, you might want to take a holiday. Yes, that's possible, yep. Say again? Say again? Live horses. Oh, Guy Fawkes. No, not quite, but you're not far off. It's actually most common breakup times, according to Facebook status updates. We scraped hundreds of thousands of Facebook status updates completely anonymously and legally, I might say. And this was the pattern that was found in the data. A mysterious peak around Valentine's Day. That's approaching, so be careful. Another peak around April Fool's Day. I don't know what you did, but it was bad. Mondays, you think people come out of bad weekends on Mondays and kind of update their statuses. Summer, you want to be young, free, and single for the summer. There, a little clear out. And the lowest day of the year, of course, Christmas Day. Who would do that? Well, actually, somebody would, because it's not exactly zero. So, we're generating so much data now, big data, every hour, every second, every millisecond. Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram is pouring through our systems, and it can feel overwhelming for governments, for citizens, for everybody. One response is to have the right kind of question. Like if you ask data the right kind of question, a smart question, a sharp question, an interesting question, sometimes it can reveal gold, sometimes it can reveal a pattern, sometimes it can reveal a story. That's the real gold here. Now, the ubiquity of data has led to a phrase, and I'm sure many of you have heard it, and it's particularly apt for this region. Data is the new oil. It's some kind of new fuel, new kind of resource we can use to power businesses and innovation. And I think it's a useful phrase, but I would adapt it slightly. For me, at least, anyway, data is the new soil. It actually feels like a new kind of matter, a new kind of material that you can gather, get your hands dirty with, dig through. And if you treat it in the right way, visualizations, infographics, insights, stories, they're like flowers that can bloom from this soil. If you ask the right question. So a lot of the work I do, I start with a question and see where it leads me. And often, the question seems to have an obvious answer, but then, it takes me on a bit of a journey. So I might start with a really obvious question like this. Who has the world's largest military budget? Yep, exactly right. The US, there it is, close to $600 billion, and here are the other biggest military budgets of the world for comparison. That number's huge. I mean, it's so huge it can contain at least 7 of those military budgets inside itself, and there's some other numbers for context. Now, you might see that number, and you might literally see red. It might chime with the political view you have of the United States. It's out to police the world, as a military-industrial complex, or whatever. But is it true that America has the largest military budget in the world? Because you have to take into account the fact that America has this enormously, fabulously wealthy economy. It's huge. The economy is huge. It can easily contain the economies of some of the largest other industrialized nations inside itself. So its military budget is bound to be massively, disproportionately huge. So to be truer, to be fairer, we have to modify the question. We have to say, who spends the most on their military as a percentage of their GDP, as a percentage of their output? When you ask that question, you get a different picture. All these other countries spring into view. We couldn't see them because we were focusing on that big number. And the USA is actually 19th in the world by this metric. So now, we live in a connected world now. We can no longer take a single data point, a single number, and claim truth or get reactive. We have to link it up with others, build that context, get a richer understanding. You do the same with armies. Who has the biggest army in the world? Yeah, China, exactly right. China, it's 2.3 million strong. And again, it might chime with the political view you have of China and whatever its ambitions might be. But again, of course, China has this hugely disproportionate population size. So we need to normalize this data and say, no, the question is, who has the biggest army as a percentage of their population? Now again, these other countries spring into view, and China plummets to 124th. It actually has a tiny army for its size. So this soil, this data soil is useful. You can gather it, you can grind it up, you can turn it into a lens. So you can see the world from different angles, different perspectives, through different metrics to get a more fully rounded, richer picture. So visualization has this potential, and it also has the potential to enhance communication, especially for governments communicating to citizens, for authorities talking to populations. And now, every day now, your audience, whenever you release a piece of material, be it a slide, a piece of social media, a press release, a document, it has to compete with everything your audience has seen that day, that hour, that second on their phones. And everything on the phone, everything in the digital realm is well designed. It's beautiful design. So now you have to design things beautifully in order to break through, in order to be paid attention to. And beauty, in the aesthetic sense, can enhance clarity, the beauty of understanding. So you can take what's quite a formal piece of communication, something like this. This is typically what you get from when you have a blood test. This is what you get from a blood test lab. This is a clinical report. Pretty inscrutable, hard to understand. You need a doctor to be able to interpret it for you. So we put this through a data visualization process. It ended up with this, a presentation of that same data, introducing color, visual hierarchy, highlighting, we rewrote the text, and so on. So without compromising the data, this document now speaks to the patient, the clinician, and the doctor simultaneously. We don't have to create 3 different documents. So that's the power of visualization, is it translates data and information into a visual realm, into a visual language that's way more universal. We perceive color and pattern and shape long before we perceive words, ideas, and numbers in the cognitive process. So imagine if all government communications could be like this. Imagine if all important information could be conveyed in a designed sense. And there's something cognitive about this visual language. You know, we're exquisite pattern hunters. Our eyes are sensitive to variation and color, pattern, and shape. That's the language of the eye. Huge amount of neurons in our brain are just dedicated to the visual system. It's a very direct, very fast, very powerful way of communicating. So if you can encode your information and data into this visual language, you take words, ideas, and numbers, and you convert them into color, shape, and pattern, you're able to communicate more powerfully, more directly. It's almost like aiming a camera at data and numbers, like being photographic, thinking about like how to frame this, like what's in the foreground, what's in the background, what's in focus, what's out of focus. It's very much a photographic medium. And when it combines, you can get understanding out of it. I'm going to give you an example. Let me see if this works. I've not done this before, but maybe a lot of you are aware of Brexit going on. How many of you have been following Brexit at all going on in the UK? Yeah, a smattering, maybe 10%. And how many of you actually understand what's going on? Oh, 0. Good. That's helpful. So I'm going to give you a visual overview of Brexit, which is racking my country, but I'm hoping to explain to you what's going on in Brexit using this visual medium. Okay. So to understand Brexit, you have to understand the European Union. This is the European Union, and these are 27 nations of the European Union. And the size here is the size of their economies. I've not added the UK yet. Then we have the Eurozone. This is the countries that take the single currency, the euro. Okay? And then we have the Customs Union, which is an area of free trade of goods. And that brings in Turkey, which is in a limited customs union with the EU. Then we have the European Economic Area, also known as the single market. Goods and services can be traded here seamlessly, and that brings in Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. And then, just to add a little bit more complication, we also have the Schengen zone, which is an area of passport-free travel. And that brings in Switzerland, which is not a member of the EU, but is a member of the European Free Trade Area, just to add a little bit of complexity. Now, this is the European Union as seen. Now, can you imagine where the UK is currently? Can you sort of point and think? Okay, it's actually here. It's in a really good position. It doesn't have to take passport-free travel. It's not part of the single currency. It's in all of the systems, and it's doing really well. And it's the second, perhaps the third biggest economy in the EU. But we have decided to exit or Brexit this system. So these are our current options, and you'll see why it's become such a political nightmare. We can do what's known as hard Brexit, or no deal. We exit the system completely, and we fall back on World Trade Organization tariffs. The problem with that is that all 163 World Trade Organization states need to ratify that agreement, if we were to do that, in the 45 days left that we have to exit the system. Or we could do what's known as a soft Brexit. We exit the customs union, but we stay in the single market. Not so soft because we would lose our seat at the table. We'd be subject to a lot of EU regulation, but have no say of it. Then we have what's the possibility of Swiss Brexit. We can exit to the European Free Trade Area. Possible, but Norway has already signaled their opposition to having such a large economy in such a small club. Then we have the semi-hard Brexit, which we exit the single market, but we stay in the customs union. But this has proved very unappealing politically because, again, we'd be still kind of in the European Union. So Prime Minister Theresa May came up with a backstop Brexit. This is the current offer. The backstop refers to the issue between the Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, which is part of the EU. They're not allowed to have a physical border due to the peace accords. So how do you control the flow of goods and people and money over that border if we were to leave the EU? It seems an intractable problem. That's the dilemma. And both, we're hoping that the backstop Brexit will lead to a free trade Brexit that we have with, like Canada has and Japan has with the EU. And that's what the no-deal Brexiters are also hoping for. It's all up in the air. We don't have many options. But we also, one option is to have another second referendum to ask the people to vote again. Or we're going to, most likely, we're going to delay Brexit. There's going to be an additional delay, and the situation is going to go on. But you can see from this visual overview, this photograph of the information and data in this system, that we have ourselves a bit of a dilemma. So that's the power of visualization, I think, to be able to open up and inform and give you a new perspective on things that don't lend themselves to linear explanation. They don't lend themselves to being read in a document. You need to see a picture of this zone. And it particularly lends itself, a lot of what I've been showing you is quantitative data, so numbers, crunchy numbers. But you can also apply visualization to qualitative data, ideas, sentiment, more human-style data. This is, for example, is a concept map to the left and right political spectrum. This shows how political ideas percolate down from government into society and culture, into families, into individuals and background in a cycle. And it's useful, like the billions, to be able to see through contrast and comparison how the differences between each side, subtle and not so subtle. On the left, it's all about fair trade. On the right, it's about free trade. On the left, the goal is personal freedom at the heart of the left. The goal in the heart of the right is economic freedom. Subtle differences, and it's helpful because sometimes both sides use the same words, but they mean different things. Like equality on the left means a level playing field for everyone, but equality on the right means opportunity for everyone. It's a subtle difference. Freedom on the left is freedom from power and abuse. Freedom on the right is freedom to achieve or fail. So both sides stand for equality and they fight for freedom, but they're standing and fighting for slightly different concepts, and that's perhaps sometimes where the conflict comes in. I have to admit, I felt a little conflicted making this image. I'm a journalist, so I've written for The Guardian, and I noticed as I was creating this image, I really wanted that left-hand side to sound better than the right-hand side. But I couldn't do that because, I would have created a visibly biased, visibly lopsided image. So as part of my process of creating this image, I had to really step into that right-hand side, really honor the perspectives there, and somewhat uncomfortably realize how much of myself was actually in that side. But it wasn't too uncomfortable because ultimately I was just looking at an image. There's something unthreatening about an image. I can see something that contradicts my view, but it doesn't threaten me. If somebody was speaking their political views to me, I might feel, whoa, chill. But seeing somebody else's views, it's like, I don't know. And there's a clue in the language when you say to someone, oh, I see what you mean. Oh, I see where you're coming from. You're telling them that somehow you've mentally visualized their perspective and you can relate to it. So maybe there's a role for visualization in these polarized issues, in these conflict areas where we can able to see someone else's viewpoint, see where they stand, and open up the dialogue, open up relationship, open up progress. So just some of the things you can do with visualization in relation to communication and engagement and understanding. And I really see visualization as a language. And this is the vocabulary. These are the words of this language. And you already speak this language. You probably see and speak these words every day in various reports and presentations. And all that's happening in visualization really is that the vocabulary is expanding. And then this modern demand and need for high-level design and color to cut through and get attention is being overlaid as well. And when you align all these things together, you get that pop, that beautiful feeling of like, I understand something. Oh, I see something I couldn't see before. So let me just end on that point. A few years ago, I was reading a book by a New York academic called Clay Shirky. Some of you may know him. He writes about internet, the ethics of the internet world. And he wrote a book called Cognitive Surplus, and it's about how millions of people sit around the world at desks, kind of bored out of their minds, waiting for projects to be involved in online. And he has this standout statistic that 200 billion hours spent watching TV by US adults, contrasted with the 100 million person hours it took to create something as awesome as Wikipedia, just as an emblem of our potential. I like seeing that image, and the side-by-side makes it clear. But the interesting thing for me was, when I create this image, I always sketch stuff before I make it digital. And this is my sketch. And you can see 100 million, I mentally scaled that. It seemed huge and vast in my mind, but actually in reality it was a lot smaller. And I think that's a cognitive deficit that a lot of us have. We can't really scale these big numbers. And I thought, I wonder if that's exploited. I wonder if that's used. So I looked around and I found this. Before he left office, President Obama announced the federal budget of the United States, the amount of money needed to run the government apparatus of America, $3,500 billion. And he said, well, it's a time of austerity, so I'm going to cut $100 million from this budget. And everyone's like, oh, great, yeah, 100 million, yeah, brilliant, let's cut that. So let's just do that cut visually, shall we? Let's see. So 3,500 billion. Now, so imagine your mind cutting 100 million from that block. Got it scaled? Okay, let's take a look. Here we go, let's cut it. There it is, 100 million. So, you know, being able to see that, being able to understand that, being able to remember that, that to me is beautiful. Thank you, everyone.